Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Zera Shimshon class for this week. This week is Parashat Yitro. We are still in the book of Exodus. As was mentioned earlier, we are flying through the Torah. We're almost halfway done the second book, and it just feels like we started Bereshit last week. So, like I answered, when you're having fun, time flies. And when you're constantly learning and yearning to learn some more, the time flies, and thank God we're benefiting from the great insights of the Holy Zera Shimshon. This week's class is graciously sponsored by the Siegel family in honor of Rosa Siegel's birthday, till 120, in good health and happiness with your children, and Bizrat Hashem, marriage for Aida Bizrat Hashem, and you'll have grandchildren soon. Amen. Okay, we're going to start off with a question. It's an interesting question. If we look at our entire Torah, we have only 6 Torah portions which are named after biblical characters. Very interesting, right? So the first one is right at the beginning of the Torah, second parasha, and that is Noah. Then we have a little later, we have Chaye Sarah. We'll call that still after Sarah. Then we take a skip. The next one would be this week's Torah portion, Yitro. If you go to the book of Numbers of Bamidbar, we have Korach, we have Balak, and then we have the final one. Anybody? Pinchas. Very good. Okay, so those are the 6 Torah portions. Out of the 54 portions of our whole Torah, there were only 6 individuals who were chosen. Should I repeat them if I said a little fast for those of you taking notes? That's Noah, Sarah, Yitro, then we have Korach, Balak, and Pinchas. Okay, these are the 6 individuals, biblical characters that were given this great opportunity of having a name. Well, we know that 2 of them were villains, or at least one was an outright villain. That was Balak. Korach was good, and he went sour. Bizrat Hashem, with God's help, each and every time we will try to address it. This week we're going to pay attention on Yitro. Okay. Now, Yitro, we can imagine what a great opportunity it would be to have your name as a Torah portion in the Torah. It's very, very prestigious, right? Even our patriarchs were not given that opportunity, and Moses had that opportunity. It was lost. Okay? But Yitro, what did he do? What did he do that made him so very, very special to warrant this? We're going to speak literally this whole evening. We're going to be speaking about this amazing individual, Yitro, and we're going to analyze him. We're going to psychoanalyze him, I'm going to put it that way, to all the great things that he did and how calculated he was in his decisions and the lessons we can learn from this great man. Okay? To start off, Yitro was the type of individual that, in essence, he heard what everyone else heard. Everybody heard about great things that were being done on behalf of the Jewish people by their God. The whole world knew about it. It was greater than national news. It was international news, literally. So everyone heard, but Yitro did something different. I want to take this question another step further. Not only was Yitro given a Torah portion in his name, the Torah portion that has the 10 commandments is in this week's portion. So Yitro is not only given that prestige of having a name of a portion named after him, he's also given the 10 commandments in it. The 10 commandments appears in our Torah only twice. That's this week, and that's in Parashat Vayetchanan, which is not a person's name. So the only time it finds itself in reference to a Torah portion with someone's name is Yitro. That's to strengthen the question, what did he do which was so great? So listen to one interpretation. And this interpretation could be very nicely understood based on the following story. Sounds pretty funny of a story, but it was actually a true story. There was once a fellow who, for some odd reason, don't ask me why, he called a plumber to come help him with his AC unit. Don't ask why. You know, there's a rule. You can't ask a question on a story. Okay. So the plumber came in. Maybe it was leaking, but that wasn't the problem. So anyways, the plumber comes over. The plumber comes over and looks at the AC unit, looks at everything, asks the homeowner and asks him, what's the issue with this AC? He tells him that his thermometer is not working. So the plumber looks at him, he starts chuckling, and he said, "Sir, That's not a thermometer. That's a thermostat. So the owner of the house looks at him. Being outsmarted by a plumber is nothing too great, right? So he looks at the plumber and he tells him, "What's the big difference?" So the plumber taught this individual a very, very strong lesson. He says that a thermometer only reads temperature. A thermostat does something about it. And this is how our sages tell us how great Yitro was. Everybody could read the news. Everybody could read the writing on the wall. Everybody can see the miracles that God produces. But who does something about it? The whole world was dormant. It was Yitro that did something about it. He came forward. He congratulated. He converted. Who else did that? Yitro was the only one. And for the very reason that he did not just see something, but he did something, that is the whole point of our Torah. You see, the Torah doesn't want us to just digest information and use this as some type of mental exercise, and it would be nice to know. No. You know what the Torah wants from us? The Torah wants us to do something about it. We see this again by Yitro. Yitro comes and he sees his son-in-law. He sees his son-in-law working very, very hard, and in his opinion, not managing his time properly. So, what did Yitro do? Yitro tells him how to fix the problem. This is exactly what the Torah wants from us. The Torah wants for us to look at life and solve those problems, come up with solutions and do something about it. This is one of the great things that Yitro did to give him not only the merit of having a name, of a Torah portion being named after him, and also that the 10 Commandments were in it, because he stood up for what the Torah wants us to do. This is as an introduction before we get into the Zera Shimshon. Now the Zera Shimshon asks and he analyzes, what is it exactly that Yitro saw? What is it that the truth is he didn't see anything. He only heard. Anyone who can open up to the Chumash, we're on page 394 in the Art Scroll. The very, very first verse, this is chapter 18 in the book of Exodus, page 394. Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Choten Moshe. So what does Yitro do? He hears. Vayishma. And who is this amazing Yitro? Well, he is a priest of Midyan, and he's also known as the son-in-law of Moses. The father-in-law. Very good. The father-in-law of Moses. What does he hear? He hears et kol asher asa Elokim leMoshe Yisrael. He hears everything that he did, that God did for Moses and the Jewish people. Ki hotzi Hashem et Yisrael miMitzrayim. And he heard this great, amazing accomplishment and miracle that the Jews were taken out of Egypt, taken out of their bondage and slavery by God. Now, Rashi asks, this is the very first Rashi in our Torah portion. It's right here on the verse. It says, Ma shmua shama uba. What did he really hear that made him come? Like, okay, there's a big, big, big story of an Exodus. Great, great miracles. But what was it that made him come? Was it the 10 plagues? Was it one of the plagues? Was it all of the plagues? Was it the splitting of the sea? What was it that made him come? So Rashi says it was two things. Number one, it was the great miracle of the splitting of the sea. This is what propelled Yitro to take the step forward, to want to come and join the Jewish nation. And the second is the victory of the war of Amalek. When Amalek comes and pounces upon the Jewish people after they are survived miraculously after the splitting of the sea, they come and they wage war. A horrible, horrible, horrible act, a crime against not only the Jewish people but against God, and they won. So these are the two things that Yitro heard. Comes the Zera Shimshon says, he asks the following two questions. Question number one was that Yitro already heard about everything God did for the Jewish people. Okay? Why is it these two things specifically that caused Yitro to come and convert to Judaism? I mean, we had 10 plagues. We had so many things that could have been the very reason why he would come. No. It was the splitting of the sea and then it was the victory of the war of Amalek. Why those? Okay. Second question, it's a follow-up question the Zera Shimshon asks. It seems like if one of the two would have been what happened, that wouldn't have been a good enough reason. It seems like, according to Rashi, that Yitro needed both of these reasons. Number one, the sea split, and number two, that the Jewish people were victorious over Amalek, waging war against them. This is the Zera Shimshon's question, and look how he answers. He says, Rashi earlier in our Torah is tackling the reason for the conclusion that the Egyptians came out to unfortunately take all the Jewish baby boys and cast them in the Nile River. He's tackling over this idea, Rashi, and he says as follows. When the Torah tells us in the first Parashat, in Parashat Shmot, when the Torah tells us that Paro comes to his advisors and he says, Hava nitchakema lo, let's outsmart these Jewish people. They're getting too numerous. They're going to take us over. So you know what their conclusion was based on that? Very good. Let's take the workforce. Let's take the upcoming army and power of these people and throw them to the Nile. They'll die then. Why would they choose that method of murder over any other? Out of all ways, I don't want to give you ideas or ways of how to kill people, but there's so many ways. I'm sure there's like a book that's 101 ways to kill somebody. Okay? But the one way that they chose how to kill the Jewish people was specifically taking these babies and casting them in the Nile. Why? So, one of two reasons Rashi gives, and they're very, very similar. Okay? Number one is we understand that God always operates in the concept of midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Why did the Egyptians need to know this? Well, if God rewards measure for measure, so you do good, he gives good. Now we're not going to get into that whole concept, we've spoken about it before. How are there righteous people who have it hard, and how are there evil people who have it good? Let's move on. Let's go to the second aspect of that. That the way someone hurts another or wrongs another, in a similar way, God will pay that person exactly back. Okay? So, listen to the rationale the Egyptian said. God operates with this idea of measure for measure, tit for tat. So if we're going to drown them, Hashem will have to drown us. But Hashem made a promise to Noah almost 2,000 years ago. And his promise was that he will never flood the world again. So this is our way that we're going to save ourselves from being punished for doing and committing this crime. So they said as follows, either Hashem, okay, that's what they said. Okay? Now Rashi says they made a big mistake. So their reason was because Hashem can't get them back because of the promise he made Noah not to flood the world. Rashi says that he made a mistake, that Paro and his advisors made a gross mistake. Number one, what was God's promise? That he would not flood the entire world the way he did it in the time of Noah. But nothing's there to stop him to bring a tsunami on one specific location or to wipe out one specific nation. Second mistake they made is God said he won't flood. But did God ever say he won't bring them or drag them into the water? Okay, so now these are the two reasons Rashi gives how the Egyptians made a gross mistake. The Zera Shimshon questions Rashi and he says, why are there two reasons? Just give me one of the reasons. Either the whole world or that God's not going to bring them in. Or that God could bring them in. Zera Shimshon gets deep, but you're going to understand this, okay? It's very understandable. The Zera Shimshon says that there is a difference between the two. You see, if God would still bring a flood onto a nation, he'll flood only one continent or one country or city, then maybe God does not hold true to his promises 100%. Because God said he won't bring a flood. Okay, flood on the world. But listen, even one continent or one country is still part of the world. Someone can come and claim. So the fact that God will not bring a flood onto one part of the world may leave room that maybe God cannot be held up to the highest level on his promises, on his covenant made. However, by the mere fact that God is coming and saying that they will come to, that he could still bring a nation into the water, that now is flawless, that God will never tamper with or never find any loophole to try to overcome any promise he ever made. Okay? So it's a greater testification of God holding up to his great promise when and if he would bring them into the water. Okay? Based on this, now the Zera Shimshon gets into Yitro's head. Yitro needs to be convinced. He needs to come up with a real reason why he's going to give himself over to God and convert and be part of the Jewish nation. He needs to be sure that this God is trustworthy, that he will hold up to his great promises. As soon as he saw that the Egyptians were punished back measure for measure for their dear and horrible crime, but how were they punished? They were punished, they went into the water. Right? By the splitting of the sea. The sea opened, the Jews went in, then the Egyptians came in, the Jews came out, U-turn as we said, and then the water just stopped its miraculous holdup, and it just went back to nature. When Yitro heard about this, he said, now I can trust God. God can never break his promise. Look at the great promise that he made to Noah back then. So now I can rely on God for the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that the Jewish people, their descendants, will never be destroyed from the face of this earth. Yitro now is fully sold. However, the Midrash tells us, the Zera Shimshon brings it down, that there was something very miraculous by when Batya, does everyone know who Batya was? That was Paro's daughter. When Batya sends her hand to grab Moses out of the Nile, you want to know what the Midrash says? The Midrash says that all of the other baby boys that were drowned at that time all came up with him. Where did they go? Again, that is another question. Maybe they miraculously all waltzed or crawled back to their parents. But now the Zera Shimshon says, when Yitro found out about that, now he's not sold anymore. Because if God promised to operate on a way of tit for tat, measure for measure, midah keneged midah, so now why are the Egyptians being punished? He's now not fully convinced to want to convert. However, when he heard about the great war of Amalek, that's when he was fully sold. Why is that? You see, during the war of Amalek, I want to quote you a verse. The verse is in chapter 17, verse 7. It's 2 pages earlier. It's on page 390. Look what it says. 17:7. Vaikra Shem hamakom masa umriva al riv bnei Israel val nasotam et Hashem lemor hayesh Adonai bekirbenu im ayin. I want to read you the translation. Translation says as follows: He called the place Masa Umriba because of the contention of the children of Israel and because of their test to Hashem, saying, this is what the Zera Shimshon is telling us, look how the Jews refer back to Hashem. They say, is Hashem among us or not? They were not sure if Hashem was with them in the middle of their battle. The Zera Shimshon says, you know what Yitro says? Look at these Jewish people. They're turning away from God. They're not giving and living up to their end of the bargain, their end of the deal to follow in Hashem's ways, and still Hashem saved them from the war of Amalek. Now I'm convinced. Because I'm convinced that God will keep his promise no matter what. You might think to say only if the Jews are righteous, God will protect them. Yitro is coming and saying, I've concluded otherwise. I've concluded that God is trustworthy to uphold his covenant that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that the Jewish people will never be destroyed, because the story of Amalek proved it. See, the miracle of the sea is what propelled Yitro to think in this direction. And that's why we needed both of these. It wasn't just one or the other. These, and then we'll soon explain how these were the greatest of miracles. But the miracle of the splitting of the sea got Yitro to think, can I trust God? Then when Amalek, that victory over Amalek came, now Yitro was convinced he can trust God because the Jewish people lost their faith in God at that moment already. And still God did not abandon them or allow them to be destroyed. He says, this is the only nation I want to cling to. And this is how the Zera Shimshon explains this first part. I want to share two lessons that we can take from this amazing novelty the Zera Shimshon shares with us. The first is that we have to remind ourselves who Yitro was. See, Yitro was a genius, a radical thinker, and he was also a rational thinker. He was an advisor of Paro. Now, Paro was the most powerful man to be in that whole era. And from father and son, generation to generation, it was the Paro for many, many years that was taking a stronghold on that whole Middle Eastern area, the civilized world of back in that day. We're talking 3,000 years ago plus. And to be an advisor to such an individual, you had to be very, very talented, very wise, thought through on every decision you make. He was at this point a priest of Midian. Not a priest to God, not that type of Kohen. He was a priest for idolatry. He was a believer in idolatry. He was proficient in its dealings and its way of operation. Yet look at what was the tipping point for Yitro to come and say, I want to leave all that and I want to come and cling to God and the Jewish people. You know what that was? That was when he saw how committed God is to the Jewish people. He says, that's all I need. If God is committed to his people, then this people is going to be everlasting. But if not, and that's how he kind of tested, that's what he was looking for. Okay, he almost had it by the splitting of the sea, but he almost lost it, but then he got it back when it came to the victory of the war of Amalek. His reassurance, his security to come into the fold was the very fact that God was committed to the Jewish people and to the promise he made to them. And that God's word is ironclad. That's what made him come. Us as Jews, we have to look into our connection to Hashem. We have to look into our Torah and find that strength to want to commit ourselves back to God because he's so committed to us. He is our greatest security system. He promises not to destroy us, at least in completion. He promises that there's always going to be a Jewish people. This is an opportunity, this is an obligation we have as Jews, as parents, as grandparents, to transmit this feeling of security, this feeling of commitment that God has towards us. We have this mandate to allow our children the knowledge, to gift them with this heritage and tradition that we have, that God really always, I'll say in a slang way, has our back. He always is there for us. And he promised that he will be there for us. The least we can do, and this is like in every relationship, is if one commits to you, you commit back. We see this by marriage. We see this by friendship. We see this amongst siblings. We see this even in business. If you have a trusted client, and there's a commitment between the two, and you know he only buys from you, and therefore you know that you can always sell him at a lower markup because you are committed to one another. If Hashem's committed to us, and we see that from here as one other example, then we should also find within ourselves to commit ourselves to him. That's one lesson. Second lesson I want to bring out is, both Rashi and the Zera Shimshon obviously make a big deal about the Egyptians being brought to the sea, opposed to God bringing the sea to them. So I want to make a following observation. If someone were to, God forbid, mug you, steal something from you, and you're chasing them all around town, and here, South Florida, we have the beach, and all of a sudden this maniac starts running for the beach, running to the ocean, and you're following the guy. It's funny how always a thief's a male, right? Okay. And you're following the guy. And whether the sea opens or doesn't open, he starts snorkeling or he starts miraculously walking on water. Are you going to follow him? No! In your right mind, you're not going to follow him. Unless he has something that is irreplaceable, that's worth giving your life up for, you're not following the individual. So now let's go to Egypt and the Jews. The Jews are cornered. They're stuck by the sea. They have nowhere to go. Oh my, another miracle, right? We had 10 plus in Egypt within the past 10 months, non-stop. Another miracle happens. So the thieves or the slaves, the bandits, they're running away. So you know what they say? Full force ahead, everyone. Pedal to the metal, into the sea. Does that make any sense? Advisors, Paro, they were smart people. This is a tremendous lesson that when a person is angry, they are not thinking straight. They are no longer rational. Their clouded judgment gets the better part of them. Their ego is so inflated that they'll do something so crazy and in haste because of their anger. In no one's right mind would you ever run after someone in the ocean. Yet a whole nation, a whole army runs after the Jews. And this is because of their anger and their haste. We've spoken about this many times. Breathing, going to wash your hands, going to wash your face, biting your lip. I heard something today. I didn't even plan on saying this. So this is an amazing story. Someone shared it to me. There was once, it's funny and sad and true all at the same time. So listen to this. And it's quick because then we're going to get back. We have so much to delve into. So there was a couple. And the husband and the wife had a very nice, decent relationship at the beginning of their marriage. But as it progresses, gets on with life, starts getting some strains. And that's why we always have to work on our marriage. A good marriage doesn't just come, it comes from investing time, effort, care, compromising. Okay, we've spoken about this. This is no new news. So there was this husband who felt like he was being emotionally battered by his wife. I know many of us feel like that. Sometimes it's the opposite. So listen to what he did. He did the right choice. He went to his rabbi and asked his rabbi, what do I do? If I lash out and answer back every time I do that, it's a war. What do I do? So the rabbi told him, do the following. I want you to take a plank of wood. Take this plank of wood and keep it in your basement somewhere. Try not to let your wife see it. And every time she berates you, every time she insults you, puts you down, and you want to lash out, run downstairs, try not to make it too obvious, take your hammer and put a nail in the board. Do this every time. Okay? He does this time and time again. This happens maybe more often than he ever imagined. And one time his wife was cleaning for Passover, cleaning the garage or the basement, wherever this plank was, and she sees this plank with nails into it. And it's fully covered. She was trying to understand what it was. She had no idea. She called her husband over. The husband was a little embarrassed. He didn't want to say anything. The rabbi said not to tell the wife. So she was prying, and he told her, okay, I went over to our rabbi, and this is what he told me to do every time you put me down. The wife felt so bad. She was so hurt, not of what he did, but of her behavior. So she said, I want to make it good. I want to make it better. What can I do? So they came up with the idea every time she compliments him, he'll run downstairs and pull out a nail. Isn't that a good idea? Okay, but they made a deal between themselves is she's not going to look at it. They went months and months and months, and finally one day, she asks him, so how's that board doing? Meaning, how am I doing? So he said, let's go look at it together. They pull it out and they see there's not even one nail left in there. She felt so good. So the husband has a smile, but then he says, come, my dear, look closer. There's not even one nail in here. But there are holes. And there's no way to repair these holes. Meaning, we have to be so careful with what we say. Because even if we try to make good, if you said something strong and sharp to somebody, it's almost irreversible. It is irreversible. That's why God gave us, and that's why we are not boards. We have souls and we have minds. This is what the Talmud says is one of the great gifts of forgiveness. See, if no one ever not forgiveness, the great gifts of forgetting, of not remembering everything. Forgetfulness is a great gift because if one never forgot anything negative that happened to them, they would never be able to continue. Whether it's the loss of a family member or any type of financial loss or crisis, or maybe someone betraying you, giving birth, very, very good, someone betraying you, you would never be able to move on in life. So as hard as it is, as soon as we leave this class, you forget everything I said, but at least you also forget the hard things that happened in your life. That's what the Talmud says is the great gift of forgetfulness. How do we get into this? I don't even know what made me get into it. The idea of anger. Yes, the idea, very good. The idea of the Egyptians' anger. Try to not act in haste. It's so easy. It's one of, as the Orchot Tzadikim, amongst other great rabbis write, is one of the hardest traits to break. And that is anger. So let us remember this story of that board and try to not do anything that's irreversible. Moving on, we're back on page 394, and we're in verse 8. It's at the last word on the page. And the verse says as follows, Vaisaper Moshe lechoteno. And now Moses recounts the whole story. Et kol asher asa Hashem leFaro Mitzrayim. Everything that Pharaoh did to the Egyptians and to Pharaoh, Alodot Israel on behalf of the Jews, et kol atila asher mitzatam baderech vaytzilem Hashem, and all of the great wonders God did and saved them and brought them out of Egypt. So now Moses has the opportunity to recount this all to Pharaoh. The Zera Shimshon asks, if Yitro already heard all of what happened to the Jewish people, why is Moses retelling it to him? What's so special about Moses retelling it to him that the Torah is making a whole to-do about this very fact? He heard it already. He knows it. Next question. The Zera Shimshon asks that previously Rashi tells us that the greatest miracle that took place was the fact that obviously the Jews were granted freedom and that God redeemed them out of Egypt. That was the greatest miracle that took place. The Zera Shimshon questions that and says maybe the splitting of the sea is way greater than that, because factually speaking, according to the laws of nature, yes, slaves could be freed. But the idea of a sea splitting in the miraculous way that it did in last week's Torah portion, that's something which goes against nature. The Zera Shimshon claims that maybe that should be a much greater miracle than Exodus. Of course, the end goal was redemption in Exodus, getting the Torah and getting to the land of Israel, but the greatest individual miracle, should be the splitting of the sea. Third question the Zera Shimshon asks, why is it that Yitro only after hearing the story from Moses is when he blesses God? See, it says that when Yitro hears, this is it right over here. This is verse 10. Vayomer Yitro, Baruch Adonai, Asher Yitzil Etchem Yad Mitzrayim. He says, blessed is God that He saved you. Why is he blessing him now? Couldn't Yitro bless God when he heard it like everyone else on international news? Right? maybe it's fake news, so maybe not. But if he already was convinced that these great miracles are taking place, it was something that no one could deny, bless God earlier. Why is he blessing him now? These are 3 questions. Just again, as a recap. Number 1, why does Moses need to tell Yitro the whole story over? Number 2, what is the greatest miracle over here? Is it the splitting of the sea or the Exodus? And number 3, why is Yitro blessing God only after he hears the story retold by Moses? The Zera Shimshon tells us that Yitro was a sorcerer in his own right. He understood witchcraft to its very core. Now, because of that, the whole world, and of course Yitro was skeptical that maybe this was just another magic trick. Maybe this whole Exodus was a fabrication. As we all know, magic is making you focus on this while I do something else up here. Right? It's, what's the word?
Sleight of hand.
Sleight of hand, very good. It's a sleight of hand. And the Egyptians were proficient in it. They were expert magicians. Yitro was above that even. So he really, really understood the nature of magic. However, he knew that Egypt had a strong threshold and control over its slaves because they erected these idols that would have real spiritual forces. This was not a joke. By its borders that would not allow slaves to escape. It would be some type of force that would just hold them back. They just couldn't break through. So Yitro now was so convinced, wow, that the Jews were able to break out of Egypt. There had to be a God that made that happen, because no one can ever break through of that. And you know what? This God must operate in a way that it vanquishes sorcery and witchcraft. And it's so amazing and great. So to Yitro, you know what the greatest miracle was, up until he heard it from Moses, was the fact that a nation was able to exit Egypt, because they broke through that witchcraft. It overrided all of that sorcery that was withholding the Jewish people. So to Yitro, that was the greatest miracle. And that's why the Zera Shimshon says, Rashi explains that was the greatest. It was the greatest to Yitro. But that was until he heard about the splitting of the sea and the war of Amalek. Because the splitting of the sea, the Zohar says, was not just some physical miracle that took place. The Zohar says in a very interesting way that every time the Egyptians were brought, as we know, they were brought up and down and shook all around and thrown all around in the water. That was literally God giving a spiritual beating to the impure forces that were governing the Egyptians. So it was also a victory of impurity and in a spiritual way over their sorcery and their witchcraft. By Amalek. Rabbeinu Bechaye, another great commentary on the Torah, the Zera Shimshon quotes him now, and says that the war of Amalek, the Amalek people were trying to beat the Jews through sorcery and witchcraft, and they couldn't. As soon as Moses told this to Yitro, now Yitro was fully convinced. He was already somewhat convinced by the Exodus because that was to him his greatest miracle. But now that God is continuing the trend, He's continuing this idea that He is 100% above all impurity and all sorcery and witchcraft and magic. All that is fake and sleight of hand. However, God is proving Himself over and over that He can overcome it. Now Yitro feels, I need to bless God. I need to bless Him because now he understood that this is for real. It's for real because, one time, maybe. Second time, 3 times the Talmud says is already as what's called a chazakah. It's a stronghold. If God's able to do it 3 times over, now the Zera Shimshon says Yitro was fully sold that God is above any sorcery and any witchcraft. To this, I just want to make sure we answered all of our questions. So we answered why He's blessing him now. Now we're all sorry. This is the one that we didn't answer. Now we're answering, why did Moses have to retell it to Yitro? He had to retell it to his father-in-law Yitro because that's the only way Yitro was ever able to understand what really happened. See, there's no comparison to hearing something once or twice removed opposed to the source. And he's not only getting it from a witness, an eyewitness that was there, he's getting it from the witness, from the prosecutor himself, from Moses, who was sent on behalf of God to teach the Egyptian people a lesson. The plagues were carried out through Moses' hands. And therefore, Yitro right now blessed God because he understood everything that happened in a different dimension. The Or HaChaim says this in another way, but the same concept. He says that Yitro was so happy after hearing this first recounting, this first-hand tale from Moses, and he was so happy. What made him so happy? What made him different? He heard it before. The Or HaChaim says, because when he heard it from Moses, he heard it with great detail. You cannot compare when you hear something with detail opposed to not. Anytime anyone ever tells you a story, anytime you read a book, you know what makes books great sellers? Or what makes shows or movies or any story being told something great is in the detail. When you start telling someone or writing to someone something in detail, you now captivate them. You're buying in, their mind's buying in right to you. You have now a captive audience in whatever way you are performing. The details make all the story so much more real. The worst thing to do when you tell over something, a story, something someone told you, is to be fuzzy on the details. When you're clear on the details, then they're going to remember what you're saying because they're paying attention. You know, so much so that if you're not sure about something, to say it definitively anyways. Okay? Because at least they're going to get the idea that you're saying. Now you don't want to, fabricate something, obviously, but when you say something with conviction, with detail, people are listening. And this is something important that we need to know. When Moses came and told him first-hand testimony, and he told him with all the details, that's when Yitro was now captivated by this story, way more than just hearsay. And it struck a chord in his emotions to want to convert right then and there. Okay? A lesson from this. The first of this whole idea of Moses retelling the story to Yitro is, I'll read it the way he put it in the book, the translation. He put sometimes this little gray box. Listen to this. Even things that seem simple and obvious take on a new dimension when learning them from your Rebbe. Meaning, sometimes you read something, you learn something, you understand something, you see something, but until your teacher, until your master, until your rabbi comes and explains it to you, you never really got it. And that is something so beautiful about our Torah and the way we study Torah. It is a unbroken chain of constant transmission. A person could never, we all need to strive to be independent learners. We need to always find our own learning opportunities, but we always need to be connected to our sages and to our rabbis. And in general, globally, but even personally, everyone has to have their rabbi where they go and they're able to confide in, they're able to ask questions, they're able to ask questions in scripture and ask questions on life. When Yitro was hearing this firsthand, the same story he heard from everyone else, but when he heard it from his new Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, it brought a whole new dimension to what took place. That's number one. Number two is, I think, a very valid question that each and every one of us has to take a step back and go all the way back to the Parashat, Parashat Shemot, but maybe even the second Torah portion of Vayera. If you were God and you want to outsmart the Egyptian people, why would you send in an emissary to come and play magic tricks on the magician? Right? So how did it start? It started with a snake. come to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. If he says no, cast down this staff and it will turn into a snake. I don't know about you, but a stick that turns into a snake and turns back into a stick, in my books, that's a magic trick. You know what? Pharaoh also had it. He did it. All his advisors did it. It's like you're coming to impress somebody with something that they know. Right? That's a basic question. If you want to come and teach someone a lesson, you're going to outsmart them. You're not going to play their own trick on them. So the truth is, it's a bad question. Okay? It's good at first, but I'll show you how it's not a valid question. You see, it wasn't that God was fighting Pharaoh magic versus magic. God was fighting Pharaoh truth versus sleight of hand and magic. Completely different. Now listen to the following. I don't know if we have any, scientists or in the room, but imagine a scientist came up to me and was coming and telling me and explaining me all of these intricate formulas in quantum physics and molecules and atoms right over my head. Is that person a smart person? Yeah, I'd conclude yes. They know what they're talking about. They either are repeating verbatim what they memorized or they really know what they're talking about. But they are definitely more qualified than myself in that matter, in that subject. But am I really sold on that person? Would I put my blood, would I sign on a line that person knows what they're talking about? No, because I really don't understand what they're saying. Right, David, if I bring you over and you're computer programming something for me, I know you know what you're doing, but I don't really understand. It's not something that I can really understand because I don't know it. Look how genius God is in his mode of operation on how to outsmart and punish the Egyptian people. He said, I'm going to come to them, and I'm going to outsmart them in something they understand. It's like one professor coming to another professor and giving them a formula they cannot figure out, and then you doing it right in front of them. You see, if God comes and shows a magic trick to the Greek people, do Greeks know anything about magic? If God's going to come and perform a miracle of nature, Greeks don't understand. To them, magic trick, God's hand, don't understand. Greeks understand of muscle building and infatuation and Colosseum and war. That's all they understand. But to the Egyptians, they understand that language. They pick up on that code. So God said, I'm going to send you to them with the same textbook. But this textbook reads differently. This textbook reads that this is not magic. And you know, they're going to detect it. They're going to pick up on it. That is so amazing. And this is another reason that Yitro came into the fold and desired so much. Because he understood it. He understood that language, that code of magic and sorcery and witchcraft. He knew it. And he opens the Torah and he looks at everything God's doing to the Jewish people. He's saying, this is a different code. This is not fake. This is not sleight of hand. To show us how genius God is in his mode of operation on confronting the Egyptians in something they'll understand and they could come to a concrete conclusion with. Okay? Last part we're going to speak about this evening, it is in verse 10, still on 396. It says, Vayomer Yitro says, blessed is God that saved the Jewish people from the hand of Egypt and Pharaoh, that saved you from under the hand of the Egyptian people. Now, the Zera Shimshon quotes a Talmud. The Talmud is very, very sharp in this instance. The Talmud is in Masechet Sanhedrin, page 94a. And it says as follows, that shame on Moses and the Jewish people for not blessing God. That they had to wait for Yitro, who at that time was not a Jew, who at that time was not even present to any of the miracles. He was the one that blessed God on everything he heard. Granted, he heard it after Moses said it to him, but Moses lived it. The Jewish people lived it. And they did not bless God. We don't see that they ever said, Baruch Hashem. So the Zera Shimshon says, hold your horses. Talmud, you're very strong. You're very stringent on the Jewish people and on Moses. But what did they do when they came out of the sea? They all sang praise. Az Yashir Moshe Ubnei Israel et Hashira Hazot. They sang this song. They sang a praise. It was even a song and dance. Is that not good enough? So listen to how the Zera Shimshon says it's not good enough. There's a difference between a blessing and a praise. You see, no one's obligated to praise something or someone. It's a beautiful gesture, something we should all do. Don't skimp on it. However, a blessing is an obligation. What type of blessing? The Talmud tells us that when there was a miracle done for an individual, and all the more so a miracle done for the Jewish population, you need to make a blessing on it. We need to bless God for doing it. And the fact that the Jewish people only praised God and they did not bless Him, they never fulfilled their obligation of blessing God. Shame on them that it had to be an outsider, someone who wasn't even there, that came and blessed God, did what you were supposed to do on your behalf. This is how the Zera Shimshon understands the Talmud. So now he's not done yet. Talmud continues. Not the Talmud. The Zera Shimshon continues with the question the Maharsha asks on the Talmud. The Maharsha asks, is one of the great commentaries on the Talmud. He says, no, Yitro was not the first person to ever bless God. Noah blessed God. If anyone would look in, doesn't have the verse here. Okay, but the verse is quoted here. Noah says, Baruch Hashem Elokei Shem. Blessed is God, the master of Shem. This is when he blessed his son Shem for being the most noble out of his 3 children. We come from Shem. We are Semites from that descendant, from that lineage of Noah. So the Maharsha says, why are we making a whole big deal about Yitro being the first one to bless God? He wasn't the first one to bless God. The terminology of Baruch was already made by Noah. So the Zera Shimshon is very, very specific. The Talmud never said that Yitro was the first to, like the Talmud says, that Leah was the first to thank God by naming her son Yehuda from the terminology of Hoda'ah. She was the first to ever thank God. Can you imagine? From the creation of the world till that time, no one ever thanked God. She was the first. Noah blessed God, but she was the absolute first. Now, what the Zera Shimshon does explain is that Yitro blessed God at the first occasion that he had. Unlike the Jews, when they messed up, they praised, and we praise the Jews for praising God. That was a great thing they did. But they overlooked their basic obligation of blessing God, and that is something that Yitro did in their place. Now, the Zera Shimshon asks one more question. It seems from the Talmud that both Moses and the Jewish people each had independent reasons to thank God for. Because the terminology of the Talmud is Genaihu leMoshe u'shishim ribo. It's a shame, it's a disgrace to Moses and to the 600,000 Jews for not blessing God. So the Zera Shimshon says, well, is it the same reason or 2 reasons? Just say all of the Jewish people. Moses is included in that. So he says that Moses had his own independent miracle he had to thank God for or bless God for, and he never did. And that was when he was saved from the sword of Pharaoh when he was 20 years old. He never blessed God for that. He might have sang praise, but he never blessed him. And then the Jewish people, for being saved and redeemed from Egypt, that was theirs. When God saw that both of them were not thanked for, that Moses didn't thank for his personal miracle, and the Jewish people as a whole didn't thank God for being saved, if one of them would have thanked God, it wouldn't be a shame. It wouldn't be a disgrace. But since collectively they overlooked those 2 opportunities, and Yitro comes and makes that blessing, then Yitro was the one who was given the great merit to bless Hashem at the first occasion over here, and it's something that the Jews overlooked and Moses overlooked also. Listen to the lesson I want to bring from this. First, I want to just add one more thing about Yitro, and then we'll bring a lesson. The Me'am Loez, who I like to quote very often, Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, he says as follows, that Yitro had everything working against him to want to commit to Judaism, commit to Hashem and the Torah. and he did it anyways. And we see this from the very first verse in our Torah portion. He had 3 different things working against him. Number 1, it was only hearsay. As the Torah says, Vayishma Yitro. Number 2, he was a high-ranked priest. That was Kohen Midyan. Do you know what type of guts and confidence that takes to step down from being the leader of a cult and abandoning all that for what you believe in? Most leaders are not that altruistic. And the third is, he had to go to his son-in-law. Normally a child or a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law goes to their father-in-law or their mother-in-law. Here, Yitro had to humble himself and go to his son-in-law. These 3 things are barriers that he overcame because of the conclusions that we said that he drew after his thinking and contemplating about all the greatness of God. The last lesson I'll leave us for this evening is obviously a lesson in gratitude. When we thank God, when we bless God, we in essence are thanking Him from the bottom of our hearts. And this is a great opportunity we have with our Siddur, our prayer book. Every time we eat something, every time we have the opportunity to pray the morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, the evening prayer, these are opportunities to bless God. These are opportunities to thank God. Now, in the idea and the concept of gratitude, which we could speak one whole hour on, I want to just sum it down to 2 different realms. There's the realm of thanking God, and then there's the realm of thanking others. When it comes to thanking God, it seems like we have an obligation to thank God. It seems like almost God needs us to thank Him. Make no mistake, God does not need us to thank Him. We need to thank God for our own good. Right? That sounds good on paper, it sounds good on recording. Let me prove it to you. The reason why we need to thank God is because when we thank somebody, to thank somebody we say the word todah. Todah comes from the word hoda'ah. Hoda'ah not only means to thank, but it really means to admit. When you thank God, you are admitting you need Him. You are admitting you are helpless without Him. That you are relying on Him. Which, by the way, is the greatest feeling ever. Because if we were completely independent, all you have as your strength is the brain power that lies between your ears, and the amount of weight you can possibly pick up, and the aim you have with a firearm, and the skill you have with a sword. That's all you have. When you rely on God, you are now tapping into an infinite world of security, strength, wisdom, and all the blessings and all the great things. So this is one thing we have to know, that when we thank God, we need to thank Him for ourselves, not for Him. I can guarantee you, it is petty to think. Although it is a dispute amongst our medieval sages, the Rishonim, if God needs our prayers or needs our thanks, one opinion is that God is intimately involved in every aspect of our lives, and in His own realm He needs it, which is very hard to understand. The other opinion is it's too petty for God to even say that He needs our blessing. Like, does it make a difference if I take a cup of water and I make a blessing before it or not? No. The difference is on me, not on God. Why? Because we're admitting and we are prescribing ourselves to God. That's the first answer. That's the first concept of thanking. Gratitude is admitting, which also overrides to the idea of gratitude towards others. When you thank others, we need to thank them genuinely. There is no way to fake a thanks. If you thank someone and it's fake, they know right away. Again, remember this, there's no way to fake a thanks. It's either genuine or not. We need to learn to be very genuine when we thank others, because we're also admitting that they helped us. And on another aspect, when you thank others for things that they did to you, first of all, realize they don't owe it to you. Rather, at that point when you thank someone, you are now encouraging them to maybe help you more, do more for you, continue to be invested in you, with its time, advice, help in any way possible. We have this obligation to thank God. We have this obligation to thank others. And I'll end off with, on the idea of thanks, if we look at our repetition of the silent Amidah, when we repeat it in The morning and in the afternoon, not in the evening. What we do is we stand there, and the chazan, the individual leading the service, is able to repeat the whole Amidah for us, the whole silent prayer. There's one blessing that he does not say for us. There's one blessing we need to say ourselves, and that is the Modim blessing, the blessing of thanks. The Abu Draham tells us, you know why? Because you cannot appoint a messenger to thank on your behalf. You need to thank yourself. So even though that messenger that's getting up there and praying on behalf of the congregation, he can do that for every blessing. That God is holy, all the requests, everything we do. But thanks needs to be done by yourself. Think of it. Think of it every time you thank someone. When it's genuine, whether it's through a letter, a phone call, or in person, when it's genuine, it really, really goes a long way. So may we always be blessed to recognize those opportunities to thank God, to thank those in our lives, and to come to these great rational conclusions of love, commitment that Hashem has for us, and us back to Him. And may we, Bezrat Hashem, have great merit to see that transmission of heritage from us to our children, grandchildren, and hopefully all the way until the speedy coming of the Mashiach. B'mira b'yameinu. Amen v'amen. We have questions. I know we have some questions.
And my question was, at the beginning,